Video games are a modern art form, every bit as valuable as cinema or music or memes. And as connoisseurs of this art, we celebrate the most talented artists, we savour the most vibrant works, and we enjoy them in ways traditional art lovers cannot. However, we can't help but rubberneck when we see the absolute multi-car pileup that is a truly, truly bad game. In that spirit, my name is not important. Well, that was just rude. Number 10, Dawn of Fear. You'd like to think the gaming industry is moving forwards and that developers have learned from the past. And it's true, Gamera Nest have looked long and hard at games from the past, like the classic 90s horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but haven't learned the lessons of the intervening decades. The controls, limited fixed camera perspectives, and laughable storyline are perhaps homages to the games that inspired it, but in the opinions of most reviewers, are things better left in the past. The graphics are an improvement on PS1 era games, but will only impress if you missed out on any horror games released in the last 10 years. It's hard to be too harsh on a game that's quite obviously made by enthusiastic fans on a limited budget, but its bugs and glitches make it hard to recommend. Dawn of Fear crawls across the line with a paltry 33. Number 9, Weeping Doll. Oasis Games' VR horror experience looks like it was knocked together over a long weekend by a team that really didn't have any great ideas for what to do with VR. Overall presentation is lacking, with hilariously bad voice acting, graphical quality that has been scaled back substantially, and a control layout that is a strange hybrid of first-person free movement and the teleportation style that many VR games rely on. The game doesn't represent great value either, costing only $10, but being only about an hour long, and comprising puzzles that might just be enough to redeem the game if they were more challenging and if there are a few more of them. And then it just sort of ends. Critics and players seem to agree that Weeping Doll barely counts as a game and only merits a score of 32. Number 8, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. There's nothing more tragic than a middle-aged franchise that refuses to accept it isn't relevant anymore. This undercooked 5th numbered entry in the series was unceremoniously squeezed onto 8th gen consoles in 2015, allegedly in order to cash in on an expiring license one last time. Fans of the original games will be disappointed to see some missing features, simplified controls, and a generally uninspiring soundtrack compared to earlier entries. Now, it's true a lot of hardcore game series fans criticise new releases for qualities that most other gamers wouldn't be really too concerned by, but you don't have to be a Tony Hawk aficionado to see that Pro Skater 5 also suffers from dull level design, boring gameplay, weird physics, poor performance, and game-breaking bugs. About the only positive thing that can be said about this drivel is that it seems to have inspired the release of remakes of the original games, which should hopefully consign this horrendous misstep to the disappointments room with its metascore of 32. Number 7, Dino Dini's Kickoff Revival. Sometimes when an ancient relic from gaming history is rebooted, we get a nostalgic look back at days gone. Rather than criticising old games, reminding us how far we've come when the simple act of controlling a character on screen is a chore, these games remind us of a simpler time when games didn't sacrifice fun in the name of realism. Dino Dini's Kickoff Revival is not that game. When FIFA and Pro Evo Soccer iterate each year, they tend to look like the same game being belched out with a new number on the front. However, viewed as an arc over decades, the mainstream football games have actually made 90s games like the original Kickoff seem archaic by comparison. By the end of a match of Kickoff Revival, you'll be longing for a game with intuitive controls and some regard for the rules of the sport. This sad excuse for nostalgia bait is an embarrassment to the memory of the original game and has been lumped with an unimpressive score of 31. Number 6, Ghostbusters 2016. Surprisingly, this movie tie-in with the highly anticipated 2016 movie of the same name turned out to be a bit of a critical dud. Even the reviewer community, who we can hope would at least look at the title with a degree of impartiality, slammed this 4-player co-op twin-stick shooter for its large, empty levels, boring, repetitive gameplay, and overall lack of challenge. While sound design, in particular the music, was one positive factor of the game, the graphics were generally looked on as being a bit basic. The final nail in the coffin for Ghostbusters was the $50 asking price, which was not remotely justified by the quality of the end product. The Metascore for this, one of the least impressive games of 2016, stands at just 30. If you're enjoying the video so far and want to show your support for the channel, a like would be appreciated, and you can keep up to date with my latest uploads by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. Cheers! Number 5. Air Conflicts Vietnam Ultimate Edition. 2013's Air Conflicts Vietnam for 7th gen consoles wasn't exactly a critical darling, so a remaster for the 8th gen had a lot of ground to make up. Unfortunately, it seems that optimising for newer hardware wasn't on the pre-flight checklist for developers Bit Composer Games, as despite minimal effort expended to improve the early 2000s era visuals, the frame rate still periodically drops perilously close to zero. Audio is a mixed bag, with the cliched yet not unappreciated use of a 60s rock soundtrack accompanying monotone, stilted voice acting delivering from a poorly written script. Despite the novel addition of a campaign told from the North Vietnamese perspective, this lackluster remaster can't overcome the game's many other flaws, and the few publications that thought the game worthy of reviewing gave Air Conflicts Vietnam Ultimate Edition a rather pathetic aggregate score of 30. Number 4. The Quiet Man. Described by some as doing for the medium what The Room did for cinema, The Quiet Man is an atrocity. A third-person action game in the mould of the Yakuza series. If the Yakuza series were broken and boring, the Quiet Man's unique hook is the main character's disability. Dane is deaf, and, for the first playthrough at least, so are you. The concept that the player should experience the story from the perspective of a person who can't hear is rather undermined by the fact that the story doesn't really come across as written to be understood without sound. As an afterthought, possibly as a reaction to bad reviews, the studio caved to pressure and released a patch that allows masochists to replay the game with sound and subtitles, revealing a terribly acted amateur movie interspersed with occasional badly made fight sequences. The Quiet Man is defended by some as being so bad it's good, but the reviewer community doesn't see it that way. The current Metascore of 28 would suggest it is just very, very bad. Number 3. Basement Crawl. I feel a little uncharitable even mentioning Basement Crawl on this list. Developers Bloober Team almost immediately apologised publicly for the game's poor state on release, and after some attempts at patching it into a playable state, essentially wiped the slate clean with a whole new game named Brawl. However, as of the time of posting this video, it's still possible to buy Basement Crawl on the PlayStation Store, so I'm afraid that for all the massive improvements the developers made in the follow-up, Basement Crawl remains on this most inauspicious of lists. Basement Crawl is a bad Bomberman clone, with tacked-on funhouse horror theme, a cast of playable characters that's smaller than the number of potential players in a game, virtually indecipherable visuals, broken online play, no single player, and little variety in levels. Basement Crawl should probably have been pulled from stores and possibly never even released. However, we don't live in that timeline, and instead it remains the third worst game on the PS4 with a score of 27. Number 2. Road Rage. Remember Road Rash? Judging by my channel's analytics, at least 16% of you probably do. For those who don't, this classic 90s arcade motorcycle racer had mixed the racing game aesthetics of the Outrun series with some light combat mechanics, allowing you to win races by fair means or foul. Road Rage wants to be a spiritual successor to this series, bringing the melee combat motorcycle racing theme to a modern open-world racer. As laudable as this goal may be, reviewers pointed out the extremely flawed execution wasn't going to help. On a surface level, the game's presentation is decidedly previous gen, and the gameplay is boring and repetitive. But of course, this is the second worst reviewed PS4 game on Metacritic, so obviously that's not the worst of it. No, Road Rage shipped with enough bugs, broken physics and visible lack of effort and quality control to make it a tortuous experience to play, and earns a Metacritic score of just 26. Number 1. Afro Samurai 2 Revenge of Kuma Volume 1. This is what your curiosity has wrought you. If the above 9 entries in this list weren't enough to destroy your faith in gaming, let this be the last straw. This optimistically titled Volume 1 of Afro Samurai 2 is, in the eyes of the review community, the worst game on PS4 and worthy of a paltry metascore of 21 points. I'm not even sure I need to talk about it. In fact, I won't. We've reached the end of the generation, so hopefully we won't see any more entries to this list in the next few months, but I may compile a user score video if people seem to like this one. Let me know your worst games down below, kindly do the usual YouTube things while you're down there, and I'll see you next time. Surprisingly, this movie tie-in with the highly anticipated 2016 movie of the same name turned out to be a bit of a critical dud. Surprisingly, this movie tie-in with the highly anticipated 2016 movie of the same name turned out to be a bit of a critical dud. Surprisingly, this movie tie-in with a highly anticipated 2016 movie of the same name turned out to be a bit of a critical dud.